Hi, everyone. So, as I've said before, welcome to this final edition of Here's Tom with the Weather on a Friday. We are going to be back, though, in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be on a Monday, as I've just said. So, anyone who's listening on YouTube or on audio on Spotify or on iTunes, just to say that just the recording times have changed for you. And we're going to start off with something a little bit different today, and it goes like this. And this is basically the substance of a revealing letter which Bill Wilson wrote several years ago to a close friend who also had troubles with depression. So we're going to read the first page, and the letter appeared in Grapevine in January 1953, and it's called Emotional Sobriety. Joe?
So this is in the words of Bill Wilson. I think that many oldsters who have put our AA booze cure to severe but successful tests still find they often lack emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of much more real maturity and balance, which is to say, humility in our realizations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God.
Those adolescent urges that so many of us have for top approval, perfect security, and perfect romance, urges quite appropriate to age 17, prove to be an impossible way of life when we're at age 47 and 57.
Since AA began, I've taken immense wallops in all these areas because of my failure to grow up emotionally and spiritually. My God, how painful it is to keep demanding the impossible, and how painful to discover finally that all along we have had the cart before the horse. Then comes the final agony of seeing how awfully wrong we have been, but still finding ourselves unable to get off the emotional merry-go-round.
How to translate right mental conviction into right emotional result, and so into easy, happy, and good living. Well, that's not only the neurotic's problem, it's the problem of life itself for all of us who have got to the point of real willingness to hew to right principles in all of our affairs.
Even then, as we hew away, peace and joy still elude us. That's the place so many of us AA oldsters have come to. And it's a hell of a spot, literally. How shall our unconscious, from which so many of our fears, compulsions, and phony aspirations still stream, be brought into line with what we actually believe, know, and want? How to convince our dumb, raging, and hidden Mr. Hydes become our main task.
I've recently come to believe that this can be achieved. I believe so because I begin to see many benighted ones, folks like you and me, commencing to get results. Last autumn, depression, having no really rational cause at all, almost took me to the cleaners. I began to be scared that I was in for another long chronic spell. Considering the grief I've had with depressions, it wasn't a bright prospect.
I kept asking myself, why can't the 12 steps work to release depression? By the hour, I stared at the St. Francis prayer. It's better to comfort than be comforted. Here was the formula, all right, but why didn't it work? ... And Bill
Wow.
Wilson goes on. And our friend Alan here has really taken this letter from way back when and really put some thought into it. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Berger, would you talk a little bit about how you went from reading a Grapevine article to writing a book in 3 minutes?
In 3 minutes, okay. Watch this. Oh, that'll test my emotional sobriety, Joe. That give me a challenge like that. Well, listen. The first thing is, look, I'm in long-term recovery myself, and the first experience I had. So this was back in the summer of 1971. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I joined the Marine Corps in '69. I served in Vietnam 70 to 71. So I come back and went in the Corps with full-blown alcoholic, came back from Nam, a full-blown addict, and was through, either through serendipity or synchronicity, probably the latter. I ended up getting some help, and I really needed it, even though I couldn't have owned that and told you that. Deep inside, I knew it. I knew something was wrong. I knew that something was wrong with me in terms of how I was trying to live my life. So I end up in this brand new program that they put together to help Vietnam veterans deal with their addiction problem instead of discharging them from the Marine Corps, which is what they did up to that point in time, right? They just totally took no responsibility for what happened for us over there, and they sent us back to our community and let our communities deal with us, which was, there was very few services back at that time. So the program was brand new. I was the third Marine admitted the third day of the program, but because they didn't know anything, they turned to the AA community, and there was a real strong AA community in the city outside the Marine Corps Air Station, Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station. It was Kailua. And there was a bunch of young people who had found their way in this program through this woman named Flowbird, but that's for another story at another time. But one of them came to us, and we started a Tuesday night rap session on recovery. And his name is Tom McCall. So I met Tom in the August of 1971. He's still my sponsor today for over 50 years. It's been amazing. I mean, I've got story after story I could tell you about how valuable that relationship has been, and how key that relationship has been to my recovery. But what happened is, the night I met him, something really changed inside me, Joe. And that's the first time I heard somebody talking about themselves with what I would call emotional freedom. It was okay for Tom to be Tom. Tom stood up in front of us and owned who he was, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I say. And he, while he still was striving to continue to become what he could be, there was an acceptance in him that I had never witnessed in another human being in my life. And especially when I looked inside myself, I was never okay with who I was. I always felt if I could be different, then I could somehow be okay. And so there was this restless discontent inside of myself, about being the person I was. And it's very hard to put together a life when you reject yourself. I mean, it just doesn't work, man. It's just it's just not a strategy that's going to, result in any kind of happy and good living. And so that's what was happening for me. I was really, really, full of self-hate. I didn't like myself. I rejected myself. I wanted to be someone other than I was. And here was this man that comes in and just comfortable with who he was. The minute I saw that, Joe, something woke up deep inside of me. I said to myself, not consciously, but I believe at a subconscious level, unconscious level, that's what I've been looking for. If I could find that in my life, then I've got a chance to make my life work. That was the experience I had. I mean, and it was profound, man. I mean, I tell people all the time, a lot of people come into program because of they're in trouble, they're in pain, and that's a great motivation. The problem with that kind of motivation, it dissipates after your medical problems are over, your legal problems are over, your wife's not going to divorce you, or your husband's not going to divorce you anymore, CPS, Child Protective Services, giving you back your kids. Then the motivation to continue to do what you've been doing wanes, right? It weakens at that point in time. But the motivation that woke up in me is wanting to become what I could be. I call that a growth motivation. And when that took over my life, man, all of a sudden, my life was on a whole different foundation. I went up to him after the meeting. I says, how did you achieve that in your life? And he says, stick close, I'll show you. I did. I mean, and I went to great efforts, man. I went to any lengths to get what he had at that point in time, man. I lived on the other side of the island. I would hitchhike over the Poly Highway. If you've been on Oahu, you know what I'm talking about. And I'd go to meetings with him every night of the week, and on weekends we'd hang out. And he shared very, very generously what he had received in his recovery. And it started working. All of a sudden, things inside started to click. I started to find a way. Not to say that my life was perfect at that point, but I knew I was on a path that was going to lead to a new experience in life, to the discovery of new possibilities. In fact, I describe recovery as just that. It's the discovery of new possibilities in our life. So here I am off on this journey, have no idea where it's going to go. I'm a high school dropout. I've got 90 days clean. They don't have any counselors at the program. They asked me to come on board. I said, it beats pushing a 105 howitzer around. Well, actually, I was on the Marine Corps boxing team at that point, getting my butt kicked on a regular basis. So when it said, hey, you can sit down and talk to someone, not have to duck punches, I thought that sounds like a much better idea, right? So I go ahead and I joined the staff at the drug center. It was called the Drug Information Center. And now the second thing happens to me. I get turned on to working with people. Now I find that my God is that being of value to someone and trying to make a difference is so rewarding and so valuable. And I want to do that. And then the third thing happened to me. I got turned on to school. Now I was a high school dropout. I wanted to go back to school. I made that decision at that point. I want to become a clinical psychologist and see what I could do to give back. So now that's the path I'm on. I start going to school, start learning, a lot about psychotherapy. I'm very fortunate to have some very, very, very good mentors in my career, notably doctors Walter Kempler and William Rader. And I'm also now learning about all these different approaches to psychotherapy. And I start to see that the steps are grounded in solid psychological principles. A lot of people criticize it and they say, oh my God, it's a religious program, or in psychology God became a bad 3-letter word, it wasn't scientific. But here I am getting exposed to this stuff and I see, my God, the experience people are having, the changes are rooted in solid principles that happen in all good psychotherapy, that the arc of recovery is very similar to the arc of recovery that happens in mental illness and in dealing with other issues in our life. And so now I'm so excited about integrating these psychological ideas into the program and bringing my own personal spiritual experience, this aha moment of, my God, it's about emotional freedom, now wedding it and integrating it with all of these things I'm learning. And he gave me, Joe, Bill's letter in my first year. I read it and I didn't like it because it talked about my dependency and I didn't want to face it. Look, I'm a Marine, man. Marines aren't dependent. We take the hills, right? Go do that. Marines, we never give up, that kind of a thing, that idea. So I couldn't embrace the wisdom in it. I wasn't ready. And I love that about our program. We say more will be revealed. If you hang around here and you keep doing the work, you create a space inside of yourself that allows you to see things that you couldn't see before. It's almost like I think we have to have a little self-esteem to see how messed up we really are. And I didn't have any at that point in time. And so it's hard to take something away from nothing, right? We don't do well with the negative, the subtraction into these negative numbers. But after a while, about 20 years later, I come across this letter.
Yeah.
And I'm blown away. Now, with what I know as a clinical psychologist, what I've experienced in my recovery, the times now when I go back and look at whenever I got disturbed, it went right to the issues that Bill was talking about. And I go, my God, this is so important. This is the best kept secret in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, when I came across that letter, Joe, nobody was talking about emotional sobriety. Nothing. I had probably been to, let's say, thousands of meetings up to that point in time, after 20 years. Well, I maybe heard about it a handful of times in meetings and more as As Bill Sees It, a reading out of As
Yeah.
Bill Sees It. But nobody ever has taken the time to stop and say, wait a minute, let's focus on this. Let's make this a focus of our recovery. And then I discover in the 12 and 12, Bill even wrote that if we practice the principles of the 12 steps in our daily lives, that we and those about us begin to achieve emotional sobriety. The intent of the program is the achievement of emotional sobriety. Well, that was it. That did it for me. As soon as I saw that, it's like it all came together. I said, now I get it. Now I'm starting to see what this all really means for myself, for recovery. And I really believe that it is the next frontier for us. I don't think our consciousness was ready in the 50s to embrace this stuff. I think we had to go through years of Jerry Springer and other stuff to get here. But but we're finally now bringing all this stuff forward. And I think that we're mature enough to start to really get honest with ourselves and really look at these issues that I think are incredibly important for people to experience what I would call full recovery. Ernie Larson's calls full recovery, complete recovery, optimal recovery, however you want to think about it. Emotional sobriety is that pathway to it. So that's how I came to it. And then I started to say, my God, let me write a book. Let me take these ideas from Bill's letter. That was my first book on this, 12 Smart Things to Do When the Booze and Drugs Are Gone. Let me pull out some of the psychological issues involved, and let me devote a book, because I like 12. Let me find 12 things to talk about in the letter, which you can find 100 things to talk about in that letter. And that was my first book. Then after sitting with it for about 20 years, Herb Kagan and I, he's a good friend of mine, I brought him into this emotional sobriety world. We started doing workshops together. And as part of the experience of doing these workshops, I developed these 12 essential insights for emotional sobriety. And that's the latest book that's just been published this last year.
And like you've described the process in describing your path. Like one of the essentials is finding a purposeful life, right? Yeah. Which is an action. It's actions you take. It's not a feeling you get, right? Yeah. And you also describe when you're not ready for it, right? Like I volunteer at a treatment center in Toronto, Canada, and I'm just a lay person, just a peer support worker. There's a counselor, and it's an aftercare, right? And these people, when they left treatment, they thought, what am I going to need aftercare for? I've had treatment. Right. I'm good. Right? They're not ready for what's next, right? When they get 1 year, well, I've got 1 year. I've seen it all. I've had my first birthday, my first New Year's, my first everything. I'm going to be fine. And they'll hear someone with 10 years sobriety saying, it's a lifelong game. It's a constant struggle. Oh, you don't have a problem. You and your first world problems. My hair's still on fire. What are you talking about, right? But you have to be ready for this. And then when you're ready, like you and I both share this, it's embarrassing. We're incomplete. We're flawed. We never get to spike the football and say we've done it. We're all that in a bag of chips, right?
Well, that's so true, Joe. And see, it is a realization that no matter how hard we've worked on trying to bring some balance to our life, look, we're told right away from the beginning, what's the root of our problem? Our selfishness and our self-centeredness. Now we can get that because if we look at that issue through the lens of our alcoholism or our addiction, we see how self-centered our behavior was there. But what we don't fully appreciate is how big of an issue that is. We talk about the unmanageability. Well, how can my life be manageable when I make everything about me? You see, it's an impossibility for me to be able to be in sync with and flow with reality if everything is about me all the time. And what's underlying this thing is that it's all about me thing, this personal importance. I make everything about me. And when you start to get that, you start to see, or I started to see, how much I took everything personally. I'll never forget. I was 5 years sober, going to meetings in Long Beach, California. In the Bank of America, they opened it up afterwards. They figured they'd rather have the people in recovery come into the bank to go to meetings rather than rob it. So they opened up the back doors to us to come in and hold a meeting in their conference room. And I remember going to celebrate my 5 years, and I was so excited. I had 5 years. It's August, right, 1976, going to school and stuff like that. And I show up, and nobody brought a cake to celebrate my birthday. Oh my God. I had such a resentment towards it. Those selfish bastards. Nobody's thinking of anybody else. And of course, when I'm doing that, what am I doing? I'm projecting my selfishness. I'm not thinking maybe the guy that had the cake that night had a crisis he had to deal with. That's why he couldn't pick up the cake. I made it all about me. Of course, it was all about me. That pattern repeated itself so many times in every area, whether it was with my girlfriend, my wife, my professors. I mean, it just kept showing up. And that's why I think that if we really embrace the ideas in emotional sobriety, we get a lot of opportunity. I call it emerging opportunities to work on ourselves, because as soon as we get disturbed, if we start to dig in, we're going to find where we're off, what my expectations were, what my demands were, what I expected other people to do to make me feel okay. And then that's where the humility comes in, is to really unhook people from those expectations, those demands, and say it's not their job to do that. That's my job. It's time to stand up, Alan. Time to stand on your own 2 feet. Time to learn how to take care of myself.
You also address the yin of that yang, the codependence, the I'm nothing, it's all about you. I'm incomplete. Looking after everybody else, not me, is still not a right-sized view of my place in the rest of the world, and needing other people to validate me, right? It's
Well,
still
that's so
a
true,
needy,
Joe. See,
selfish thing.
if I've rejected myself and I am not able to support myself, is the phrase I like to use for this. And that doesn't mean that I don't need you. Support myself means that I take responsibility for what I need, and I take responsibility for interacting with those people in my life in a way to give myself a chance to get my needs met.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm communicating something to you, it's not just about how you listen to me, but it's about how I also communicate to you and talk to you about what I want. If I start out by putting you down, trying to get something from you by criticizing you, well, good luck with that, Alan. I mean, all I'm going to do is alienate you. And then I'm going to say, look, what kind of friend is he, man? He's not even there when I need him, but I pushed you away. See,
Yeah.
That's the stuff. Those are the subtle things, the nuances we got to pay attention to. So you're right. I mean, when we start to do this, when we start to look at ourselves from this point of view, it really does open up a lot of possibilities that we couldn't see before.
And
I have no idea if I answered your question. Was there a question there that I didn't answer, Joe? I'm sorry.
no, I think you touch on it. It was really from a point of view of, someone
Oh, the
looking at this and
nothingness, the
go,
nothingness. Yeah,
I don't
the nothingness, the
recognize
other
myself
validation.
in the sort of Bill
Okay,
Wilson top
right.
dog
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Okay, well, let me finish that. So
Yeah.
look, so when I rejected myself to that point, then my need for your validation became great.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't validate me, then I had to deal with the self-hate I felt towards myself. Then I thought, oh my God, you see who I really am. You see me too as I think I am. Now, I really wasn't that. I was much more than, in fact, nowadays I see that self-hating part is so unrealistic, so perfectionistic that, it was trying to find a solution that just made things a lot worse in my life. But that my self-rejection made your approval and validation so important. Because if you didn't, then it was two against nobody.
Yeah.
See, I didn't know how to be there for myself. I didn't know how to stand for myself, and not against anybody, to just stand for myself. I had no clue on how to do that because I didn't like myself.
I thought somehow the prize of recovery was transcending the human experience, which is really emotional bypassing, right? I didn't want to feel it anymore.
True. That's right. I laughed because I said that. I thought my first take of the steps were, I finally found a way to become perfect. These steps got the secret. Somebody figured it out. Now I'm going to be able to pull it off, right? Couldn't do it before, man, but now I got the tools. This is my path to perfectionism, which meant going beyond human, transcending my humanity. Well, isn't that another form of self-rejection? Just masked in another club, in another costume? Of course it was. Same idea. And if and it's a great way to say it, Joe, is the steps are to help me embrace my humanity and to be able to be free from all of these ridiculous ideas of who I should be and how life is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Which also means is to get free from anxiety. And I want to touch on that at some point, so we can come back to that later if you'd like.
Free from anxiety? Come on, don't leave us hanging.
Well, look, the amount of anxiety that each of us have is pretty amazing. And where does it come from? Well, it comes from this idea that if life is a certain way, then we're going to be okay. I call it the I'm okay if mentality, right? I'm okay if my wife does this. I'm okay if I get that job. I'm okay if my girlfriend says, yes. I'm okay if I'm okay if. I mean that if you just distilled my life, that was the basis of my unmanageability. Because if I'm okay if, it means that I am so focused on what you're doing or what you're not doing to see if I'm going to be okay. And it doesn't stop there, just being hypervigilant. Now I'm going to try to figure out ways to control you to get you to do the I'm okay if dance routine, right? I want you to perform a certain way for me so that I'm all right. And so now my anxiety, we talk about anxiety is like being in a car that you're on wet pavement and you get out of control. What do you want to do? Grab the wheel and steer real quick, right? Instead of what are you supposed to, what's the best thing to do? Go with the skid, right? Yeah. Not take control and turn it the other way. What you do when you turn it the other way, you do what? Lose more control. That's the story of my life. That's the story of my life.
I thought anxiety was what kept the molecules in my body together.
Maybe it did. It might have.
Like, how do you go from like you talk about sleepwalking to living consciously? How do we get past those automatic thoughts of reacting to the weather, reacting to the tone of somebody else's voice, reacting to a negative comment that might not even have been really had anything to do with me?
Well, Gurdjieff is the first one that I know of that used that metaphor about us believing that we're awake and we're all really sleepwalking, right? And how do we wake up from that? And he made the point is that you can't wake up using the same consciousness that put you to sleep, because that consciousness that put you to sleep created a trance, and we've all been in this trance. So something has to happen that breaks that cosmic egg, that cracks that egg open. Now, usually, pain is going to do that. We say pain is the touchstone of spiritual progress, spiritual growth. And because it is true, but it's not just the pain, because if I make myself a victim of the pain, I don't grow, I keep myself in the trance. And this is so important. People don't understand it. It's not just feeling pain, but it's having the right relationship to our pain. It's using our pain to say, how am I creating this? So to me, it's that moment where I start to think, Bill said it wonderfully in the big book, very simply. We come to realize that our problems are of our own making. We come to realize our problems are of our own making. It is that moment, that epiphany, that starts to crack open the cosmic egg.
In as far as it's my relationship with my health problems or my financial problems or my whatever is going on in life
Yeah.
happens. Like it isn't happening for me, it's happening to me, but I have this relationship with it that although I can't control life itself, why does that matter to me? Why do I need other people's approval? Why do I I mean, that's the part we can control, right? And you talk about that.
Well, is when that starts to get revealed to us. You see, there's a difference between blaming ourselves, which I confused for a long time, and taking responsibility for ourselves.
Right.
When I blamed myself, all it did was created rationalizations. It disempowered me. It didn't empower me. As soon as I saw that the issue was what was going on, not whose fault this was, but what was happening, when I could start to look at what was going on in my life that way, now I started to see how I could be responsive to what I'm experiencing instead of reactive to it. Murray Bowen, who is the first person to discuss this issue of differentiation, and I bring it up because I think differentiation is a great concept that we can use to even further understand emotional sobriety. And differentiation psychologically is just we have an organismic wisdom that moves us. It's just wired in us. So you can call it the God within us, whatever it is. But this life force moves us from being undifferentiated to differentiated automatically. It just is hardwired in us. We have a tendency to actualize what is possible. That's what this force of differentiation is about. As I become more and more differentiated, now I move beyond blame. Bill even said that. He says at one point in our recovery, the word blame is dropped from our language. We don't even think about things in terms of blame. We think about if something happened, what just happened here? Where was I off? What can I learn from this experience? How can I grow myself from this? It's not about whose fault it was. That's irrelevant. It's about what can we do to do this thing differently? How can I grow myself from this experience? Well, talk about a different attitude, right? Instead of beating myself up or beating you up, now it's not about beating anybody up. It's about growing myself. Boy, that's freedom. That's freedom.
Well, yeah, for that freedom from blame. Like, for instance, I had to look at things like my adult child issues, but to live in the blame is just toxic. Like, it wasn't my fault, right? Does it have to be anybody's fault? Yeah. Right? We're just flawed people.
It doesn't, Joe. Somebody said we're all victims of people who are victims. Yeah. So if everybody's a victim, then the idea of being a victim doesn't make any sense anymore. What we need to think about is what can I do with the experiences I'm having and use those experiences to grow myself. And let's talk about that for a minute. See, I think growth happens just like biological growth happens. We have to digest food, and we have to take in fluids in order to grow ourselves. Our body needs nourishment to grow. Well, psychologically, we need the same thing. Now, the digestive system biologically is an incredible metaphor for growth, because what we do is we take something that's not us. Let's say I got a taste for an apple. I want a snack. I take a bite of that apple. Now, my first responsibility is I need to take the apple, pick it up, and take a bite of it, right? That's responsibility number. Next thing, chew it up. The better I chew it up, the better I'm going to digest it. Right? But what happens is we take that apple, we take a big bite, and we want to swallow it right away. We're impatient. We don't want to go through the chewing process. But I chew it up, I swallow it, it goes down my esophagus into my stomach. Now my stomach does some cool stuff. It releases these enzymes, proteins. It starts to turn, it makes it into a mulch, right? And it passes it into the intestines. the intestines start to absorb all the nutrients, proteins, vitamins, and stuff. And as it passes through our body, we get rid of what we don't need. At some point in time, you don't know that that's an apple. Now that's Alan. It has become Alan. It started as an apple, an alien thing that has now become him because of how I've digested it. That's what growth is about, is taking experience in our life, chewing it up, digesting it. And this is where people don't want to do it, because sometimes you got to feel pain. You got to go into the crying and the sadness or the helplessness or powerlessness and stay with the experience so that you can then start to extract from that experience what will nourish you psychologically and spiritually. And then what do? Let go of the waste. Let go of the stuff that's not of value to us. That's why people are talking about post-traumatic growth instead of post-traumatic stress. Because when you do that, no matter what kind of a trauma you've had, you can make yourself into more of a person than you've ever been as a result of that experience.
Yeah, like we lead with our weakness, right? Brene Brown taught us that, right?
Yeah.
Lead with our vulnerability, right? It's no more
Yeah.
the macho, like you were talking about being a Marine, right? Can't show weakness, right? Try it.
Right, that's right. That's right.
David, you started the car, you put it in auto drive, you hopped in the back seat. Are you having a nap?
Mate, this is a self-driving car. This is amazing. Thank you very much, Joe. And I don't know really where to start. There's so much that's kicked off here for me. I was intrigued to know that there seems to be there's a lot of talk about emotional sobriety now in meetings all over the world now. It seems to be it's a growth word. It's in a lot of meetings, and and that's a fantastic thing. What if I were to run an emotional sobriety meeting, how would that work? Like an AA meeting, would it be a experience, strength, and hope? I mean, I'm just intrigued to know how that would work for us general public.
Well, I think it's an important thing, because I'm really excited about the growth I see in the recovery community around this issue, Tom. It really touches me, and it warms my heart, because there's so much value in this, and I think it's going to open so many doors, and people are going to discover so many possibilities. What I did in terms of when COVID struck is I just started a 12-step emotional sobriety meeting focused on just emotional sobriety. I took it out of the AA tradition because I wanted a lot of leeway to bring in, to have discussions, to create a more workshop format. If you attend Thursday nights, you see what's been going on. It's been a format that's evolved. That's very helpful. I'm aware Patrick M., who's in this meeting, has started some other meetings that they stick very closely to the AA traditions. They read a portion of Bill's letter, they discuss it. Now some meetings are going up where they're taking the 12 and 12 and they're reading the 12 and 12 from the perspective of emotional sobriety. So I think there's all kinds of exciting possibilities starting to occur out there. And I think that the one thing that's been great to me about my experience in AA and in NA, it's a smorgasbord. I can go to, if I want roast beef one night, I'll find roast beef on the table. If there's a variety of recovery experiences out there. So I really promote the idea of whatever ways people can bring this into discussion, let's do it. And let's keep doing it, because Bill is smiling now. We all need to know that. Bill is very happy that this is becoming the next frontier. He's in his grave and saying, they're getting it. They're finally getting it. And I'm glad for that. I'm glad he's getting it, because it is that important.
That's fantastic. And just you've been around for a long time, and you've obviously been sober for half a century, and that's amazing. And I'd just like to pick your brains about what AA was like then, but where do you think it's going now, and where do you see the growth, and what's perhaps holding it back, or NA as well? What do you think are the issues perhaps that are holding us? We've seen a lot of growth in the last 2 years for obvious reasons, but what do you think's holding us back at the moment?
Well, I think back then when I came in the program, there were very few young people in 1970s. And most of the people in the program had been drinking for a number of years. I remember guys in the meetings would say stuff like to me, like, I think I spilled more than you drank, you know, and as though that was a good thing. I didn't get it. I mean, yeah, I can tell, man, you're brain damaged. Thank God I didn't drink as much as you. How do you respond to that thing? I mean, but those are the attitudes. I felt that there was a lot of rigidity in the program at that point. Very, very rigid approach to working the steps. And, you know, I consider myself agnostic, and I would get heavily criticized back in those days for, you don't have a God, you'll never be able to stay sober, etc., etc. Well, that wasn't my experience. I felt that I was having a spiritual experience. Just because I'm not embracing the God you think I should have doesn't mean I'm not going to make it. So one of the great things that has happened is that I've met all you guys that are you know, secular recovery is a wonderful thing that's happened in the program, and I think it's an evolution that's very important, and is going to allow more and more people to be able to use the incredible wisdom and technology that we have available to us to create a new way of life. So that's a positive thing. The negative side that I've seen is AA is become more fractured in terms of groups. Meaning, so a number of years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, AA had a study done. They brought in an outside organization and said, we want you guys to identify the greatest threats to AA in the next coming decade or so we can anticipate it and see what we can do to address it. And these people went out and did research. It was a very, very good company. I don't remember who it was, but they came back and they said, well, we have identified a threat, but it's not from outside the organization. The threat is inside the organization. Is everybody is fracturing into these like sponsor groups and grand sponsors and cliquish groups. And what's happening is now there's all of this infighting about whose approach is the right approach to recovery. And they say, we're afraid if that continues to go on, that the program is going to implode. AA is going to implode because of this fracturedness and this inability to appreciate and respect differences. Now, isn't it interesting that that corresponds to emotional sobriety? The more emotional sobriety I have, the less I need you to think the way I need you to think for me to be okay. I can accept you and your beliefs and whatever they are, and sit there and not need to make you wrong or me right. I can just experience you and what it means to you and appreciate that. So I think the organization needs emotional sobriety, or we're going to keep getting polarized. We're going to keep getting more and more alienated from each other, rather than, what's that first step? You know, our unity should come first. You know, the bottom line is we are all, you know, people that are struggling to find a new way of life. And that binds us together in a way that's incredible to me. So that's one of the observations I've had. And I hope emotional sobriety is going to be part of that solution, Tom.
Yeah, so do I. I think that's a wonderful answer. How can we do that then? I mean, it's obviously precious to a lot of us, and I think a lot of people join the AA team and it becomes their team, and there's one, like you said, there's one way of doing something, and then somebody else says there's one way of doing something, and it becomes, you know, it's like the history of Christianity. It's like it branches off. What's the answer then? How are we gonna get that live and let live philosophy, or that idea back, do you think?
Well, you see, I go back to, I think it begins with us. I think each one of us, if we start to plug in this emotional sobriety, look, United States has been incredibly polarized around political issues, as you know now, for some time. We're in a very difficult part of, I mean, people are talking about, is there a potential civil war coming in the United States with the polarization that's occurred? Well, it's the same thing. It's happening because we've got no we got no maturity in this. We're emotionally immature nation is what the real problem is. So we're having the same problem here that we're going to see in organizations. So for me, it comes down to how I deal with my differences with you. If we can all start to do that, I believe so much in attraction, not promotion. If people see us living our life based on these principles, they're going to get interested in what's going on because there's an energy, there's an attractiveness to it. Like I was attracted to my sponsor, Tom. I knew that there was something important in who he was, that if I had it in my life could work too. So I think that we got to keep bringing it back to ourselves, Tom. We got to keep looking at it. I'll just give you some examples. I'm on. I kind of choose presidents based on who they are, not on their political affiliation. But I saw so many people. I was on the other side. I wasn't for Trump because I saw his pathology. He's a very disturbed man. There's no question about it. He was unfit for the presidential spot. But what I would work with people that would just hate him and couldn't stand him, and I'd say, we've got to look at what we see in Trump that's inside of us that we don't like. I mean, we do. And he is a wonderful board to project all that on because he manifests every issue that every one of us are going to have with his malignant narcissism. But for those, and I'll tell you, man, that's how I tried to work with my patients on this stuff. Some of them fired me. They couldn't hang with me, and I understood. I'm sorry I wasn't able to reach them, but a lot of them, it helped them get through those 4 years that were very difficult 4 years for a lot of people.
Okay, and just with respect to anyone who's voted for that particular president or whatever, you're entitled to do that, and we have no affiliation either way.
That's right.
Just to say,
no, you're right.
Yeah,
Please don't get mad at Tom. Get mad at
no,
Dr.
get mad at Joe.
Let him deal with
Joe
it.
invited him, not me.
Yeah.
Joe, that's right. Tom is not taking any response. He's just abdicated responsibility, which sometimes is a good strategy in emotional sobriety, Tom.
Yeah.
I'm great at diverting blame. I love diverting blame. It's wonderful. I just wanted to pick up just quickly as well. You said about it's one of my sort of riffs is about spirituality and stuff, and it's kind of like one of the last ones we'll really be talking about here. But you mentioned that you're an agnostic. What does that mean?
Well, I believe in a force, a life force. I mean, I see too much. I mean, in terms of what's my experience when I watch my kids born, there's something going on here that's much bigger than me. I believe in whatever that is. I just don't have a name for it. So I believe, for me, it means that I don't see it as a deity or some, label that I would put on it. So I don't pin it that way. So when I say agnostic, it's more that I see myself as believing in this life force that now I see very akin to differentiation. So I don't know, I'm a differentiationist. I don't know what the hell you'd call me, but I know that this perspective I have leaves room for everybody else. It's not exclusive at all. People can have whatever belief they want to be in it, but I can see in this model that I've created for my recovery that there's a lot of room for all of us in terms of it. So that's the best I can do today. Ask me
because
next week, I'll talk to Joe about it and get a better answer.
I mean, because it is. I'll give Joe Joe can wrap it up for me, but I guess that the higher power thing is a dependence in its own right as well, isn't it? I'm just being contrary here, but is that having a dependence on a higher power is that not a dependence?
I think that's one of the ways that we got the veers we went on, and why Bill's insights never got realized, Tom, is a spiritual bypass. When people say, I'm going to turn this over to God, I understand what they're trying to do because they don't know what to do with it. But I also see it a lot of times as an abdication of responsibility, and that they are ripping themselves off from an opportunity to dig in and try to understand what the dynamic is that's going on for them. And so that spiritual bypass meant that people turned it over instead of started working with it. And now they didn't get the benefit, the incredible benefit that comes from doing what I called earlier, the digesting of our experience. You can't do it. If I turn it over, it's like, God, please digest this for me and come back with the answer. It's like if I had a paper to write and I say, hey, Joe, would you write the paper and turn it in for me? Well, I never get the benefit of going through all those resources, writing the paper, doing all those things. Yeah, I turn the paper and I might pass the class, but I don't get the benefit of it. I'm not saying when people turned it over, because sometimes living in that pause can help you discover a solution. So that's what I would say is more, sometimes when we go into a pause, if we do it thoughtfully, we can create some space between the stimulus and the response and discover something new that's possible. But I think we need to stay actively engaged in that process to get the full benefit of it.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm just going to hand you back to Joe. And just to say to anyone, if you've got any questions, we'll probably take a few, but could you send them to us in the chat? That would be a big help.
Let's ask Kaylee to unmute here. She's had her hand up for a while.
All right. Okay. There you go, Kaylee.
Hi, thanks everyone. Yeah, we can't send a message. It's disabled. I can't send any message. A question, sorry.
It's okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask, thank you ever so much. I don't know if to call you Dr. Alan Berger or Alan. It's like, I'd want to be respectful, but also like, anyway, Alan feels right. Is that okay? So I wondered if...
Haley, you could even call me Sue and it would be respectful.
Oh.
Johnny Cash.
Okay, yeah, I love that. I'm new to that song as well. Someone told me about it about 6 months ago, and I loved it. I'm totally on board with everything you said about the blame thing, and how once we kind of get our heads around this program, how blame kind of evaporates, if you like. It does present itself, but it's less loud. And I wanted to ask you about regards to codependency. My experience was, so I wrote this down, I understood it to be, when I was in codependency, that I was entering into covert contracts with people. So what I would do is I would never express my needs, but I would intuit everyone else's needs, on the understanding at some point they will read my mind and meet my needs, which of course they never did, which then led me to be really resentful. And then I reached burnout, and then I turn into a narcissist, and then everyone kind of rejects me, reinforcing this whole victimhood. And I think once I understood that, once that became more clear to me, and also the dependency felt like a devotion to somebody, like a kind of love. But when I looked at that as well, I always projected the worst onto them. So like I always suspected that they'd do the worst, and assumed that that they were thinking bad things about me. So once I understood that had nothing to do with love, because if I love someone, I'd never think that about them. I wouldn't project all this horrible stuff, but I had no idea I was doing them. And once I understood those two things, it was so freeing. Because I think you mentioned about the freedom as well. So the combination of understanding what addiction is and understanding about codependency, I just feel so like free and light. I mean, it's not that I don't still have issues.
Thanks, Haley.
Yeah, sorry, I've waffled on a bit.
It's okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Just to say, anyone who's asking, so I'll get Alan to answer. Just if it really is for questions and not sharing, but thank you very much, Haley.
Well, I want to respond to Haley for
sure.
So Haley, look, I often said that the golden rule is not what we were taught it is. We treat other people the way we want them to treat us, and that's unconscious. See, so we project that because we don't know how to support ourselves. See, that's the bottom line that I go to underneath that. The solution you talked about is what we call, there's 3 solutions that we have to trying to figure out how to show up in life and make it work. One is the appeal of love. If I get someone to love me, then my life is going to work. And so to get someone to love me means I got to meet all their needs, because once I meet all their needs, of course, how can they not love me? Now I've got them. I've got them in a contract that they can't walk away from. Well, that causes all kinds of other problems, but that's just one path. See, that's called the appeal of love. There's also the appeal of mastery. Some people think, well, if I'm just the best at everything I do, I'll get all this. I'll be loved and accepted. You follow me? Some people, the third path is the appeal of freedom, and they just don't want to need anything. They want to become needless and wantless so that nothing upsets them in life. Those are the three paths that we tend to follow in our lives. Codependents follow the appeal of love, but the truth of it is all three of these solutions are based on being emotionally dependent and I'm okay if mentality. So I see this whole thing, the emotional dependency, is much bigger than codependency. Codependency is a very specific example of emotional dependency. The emotional dependency I'm talking about is a much bigger issue.
Thank you very much. So listen, we are getting a lot of questions in chat. So if you raise your hand, we'll get a question. But just to say, we are short of time. So, and Alan's a busy man. So it really was about a question, please. So if you want to raise your hand now, I know there's a lot of questions in chat. Raise your hand now. We'll try and get through you. Alan, are you good for a few minutes? Are you okay?
Yeah. I'm on vacation. So the next stop.
Oh, wow.
Is the pool. Next
okay,
stop is
Jimmy.
The pool.
The pool. Oh, nice. You're in California, aren't you, or something? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
nice.
Palm Springs.
Yeah. I just step out the front door. I'm in a pool here. It's so wet. Here you go, Jimmy. Go for you, mate. There you go.
Hey, Al. My name's Jimmy. I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. Hey, Alan. I attend your meeting on Thursday nights, and I just had a question. That the original AA message that is in the big book. Do you think that just gets compartmentalized only to the drink issue? When in that original message, the real problem centers in our mind and not the drink. That's only a symptom of the thing, and that people have so much compartmentalized it just to the drink that this is where we're coming to a separate thing. And when we start calling it emotional sobriety as a next frontier, do we not make that something to be dependent on, when these 12 steps should actually, when he talks in his letter, couldn't we 12-step ourselves into emotional sobriety? Do we start making a moving target, a bar to reach towards that actually through these 12 steps we should be able to get to, and is that not the idea of the 12 steps?
Well, I hope I'm understanding what you're saying. If not, please come in and help me get a better understanding. But you're right. I think it got compartmentalized because it was easier, right? If I just focus on this, I can take a bite out of this and work on this. The second half of that first step, that our lives had become unmanageable, people related that to their alcoholism, and they blamed their alcoholism for the unmanageability. The one thing that I'm aware of is that unmanageability, in my opinion, starts way, way early in our lives. It's like Apollo 13, when they had to do the burn to get back to Earth. And they had just a small little window, and if they burned too long, they were going to miss, right? Earth, right? So here, when they started out, that 1 degree off isn't going to mean anything. But after 10 years in our life, that unmanageability starts to present itself with all of these issues. And see, I think that's the issue here. Now, what I say is that we have to have both. We can't ignore the physical sobriety part of this, because you can't do the work you need to do if you still got your head in a bottle or you're still using. You just can't do it. So we need physical sobriety and then emotional sobriety. Now, what I'd also say, though, is it's also true that now I'm finding, because I do a lot of consulting for treatment programs, I've been bringing in this idea of emotional sobriety into the first 30 days of their treatment. And you know what people are finding? That they're getting tools to deal with some of the issues that would have led to relapse when they left. So now we're seeing that we don't have to have these ideas. You got to do this first and then this. Remember the whole thing about smoking. You can't quit smoking if you get sober. You're going to relapse. That used to be a big thing when I first came in a program. Now we're saying, you know what? The truth of it is, the research shows if you quit smoking when you get sober, you got a better chance of not relapsing. So we got to let go of some of these things and let our practice determine what happens, not our ideas about it. So that's what I would say. Let's be flexible and let's keep an open mind, and let's continue to focus on what works.
Cheers, Jimmy. Thanks. Teresa, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I joined your meeting late. Thank you so much, Alan. Your audios have helped me so much. I found out about you through Herb K. And the question I want to ask, because I'm really struggling, I'm in his workshop, I'm doing my column 3 around a particular issue. And I just managed to finish this column on this particular person, and then I just became really distressed, started eating sweet things, etc., having a lot of physical responses. I suffer from complex trauma. And what I'm struggling with, wanted to ask you about is how do I practice the program in an environment where I've set a boundary about somebody not touching me physically from behind. I don't know why I have a struggle with it. And it's not a question of just don't do this. I have a struggle with this emotionally. I didn't understand it. And I've asked for this several times. A person ignored it. I put my hand on that person, pushed them away and said, don't do that again, otherwise. And they continue to do this. This is a place where I live. That person has somewhere else to go. This is where I live. I'm not, I'm trying to find out how I practice the program with this particular issue in a healthy way, because the messages I'm getting, yeah. So that was my question.
Well, let me see if see. I think given that you've tried to set your boundaries and the person is still not respecting them, now your job is to not take what they're doing personally. You got to let that go. It has nothing to do with them disrespecting you. It has to do with them. So your job now, and this is why it's still hurting, because you're giving it meaning, that they're not respecting you, that they're abusing you again like you were abused before. You got to differentiate this from, what I say is you got to differentiate now from your past. What this person is doing is what they're doing for whatever reason, and it has nothing to do with you. So if you can get rid of the meaning that you're giving to it, it's not going to upset you as much. But it's always the meaning that we give to these things where the problem comes in. We're meaning generators. We're constantly giving meaning to our experience. And when we take things personally, the meaning we give to things conclude things like, they're not respecting me, they're not this, they're not that. And then when our self-esteem or our sense of self gets hinged on that, and it doesn't have to be. And then if you get that one down, then the harder one I would give you would be, you start to talk to them about what does it mean for them to touch you, and try to understand what the hell is going on from them. But you don't have to take that step. You can if you want to, but if you take the first step, you'll get some freedom from this.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Teresa. So
should I put up a little like, hey, Tom, I was thinking about getting, how, do you ever watch the Charlie Brown or read the Charlie Brown comics?
Yeah, of course.
Remember Lucy had that little psychiatric stand for 5
yes,
cents?
The psychiatrist is in.
You could either get a cup of lemonade or you could get advice. So I'm going to get one of those. Joke, we got to make me one of those. Psychiatry, 5 cents or something like that.
Yeah. I was like, when she
they may already have a Zoom filter where you can add that on your screen,
I always used to like it when she used to pull the football away all the time. That was so much like my life.
I loved it. And he'd get upset and he'd say, "Why are you doing that to me?"
Yeah, and she always convinced him to kick the ball, and she always pull it away. Genius.
Such a relationship. I mean, that was the epitome of all our relationships.
Yeah. So I've got final question here from the board from David. This is I'm really interested to hear this question actually. So he wrote it to me. So David, over to you, mate.
Hi. I have tried to introduce this topic at meetings, and it doesn't go over well with some of the older members and some of the newer members. I think it has to do with that compartmentalization. You know, they choose to focus on the physical sobriety. So the question is, and I think I already know the answer, how do I attract them to this and not get them to just outright say that this is not part of recovery? This is not the focus of our recovery.
Well, I'm wondering what you know to be the answer, but I'll say what I think, and then look, I don't think you can do that, David. I think all you can do is continue to follow what a very, very wise Catholic saint said at one time. He goes, "Everywhere you go, preach the gospel, and sometimes use words."
Ah,
Everywhere you go, preach the gospel, sometimes use words. I think people that, you're taking them head on, they're probably not going to be available for it for whatever reason. But, maybe over time, when they see you come into the meeting and they see how your life is working, they hear your shares on how you're dealing with things. I think that might be the way that this thing turns around. But I don't think that there's going to be any way to convince someone about something like this. You could ask. I mean, I would take a few of those people aside myself. I mean, I'm more of a confrontationalist. I went in the Marine Corps, remember? So I'll sit them down. I'll say, look, man, I bring this up and I feel that there's a strong resistance and animosity towards it. Can you help me understand what's going on and your reaction to this stuff, and see if I could talk it over with them? I mean, you could try that as well, but I'd make that more personal than in a group.
thank you. Yes, I was thinking it was, if I set the example
Yep.
and just correctly, they may be attracted to it.
Yep. I think so. I think that's it. And once again, on a personal basis, look, I think the reason, so let me just share this with you, is when people have a hard time with this, as a psychotherapist, I know my work is to help people deal with resistance, because it's not a simple thing of just saying, I want to change this, and then we change it. We know what we need to change in our life. There's forces at work that get in a way of us changing what needs to be changed. In Gestalt therapy, we call that resistance. We don't mean that the person is resisting getting well. It just means that there's a configuration operating within their personality that doesn't allow that change to take place. So we have to help people understand how they're interfering with their growth and their development. So that's what Gestalt therapists do. So in terms of this, is when people have strong objections to it, like you'll even hear things that's not, we're here to talk about drinking, not our emotions. I mean, I've heard that in meetings, and for me, I've got a chuckle, man. I mean, are you kidding me? Or you think that that's what's happening here? So for me, I understand when people don't want to look at this, it's probably because they've got some stuff inside of them that they haven't faced yet, and that there's a lot of fear going on, anxiety going on, that's keeping them from facing these things. When I came in the field back in 1973, and I worked at San Pedro Peninsula Hospital, and I think it was 75, we were really excited because we were one of the first programs fully committed to family. And what we saw is that some counselors encouraged their clients to bring their families in, and others didn't. And what was the difference? Those counselors that had unfinished business with their families did not encourage other families to come in to work on their issues. And we had to address that directly. And once we started to address that, at one point in time, we had like 250 people in an outpatient program, and families were involved for 9 months after they left inpatient treatment. So it was an incredibly powerful program, but we had to deal with the counselors' resistance to the family coming in, which is, I think, the same thing you're going to see in meetings.
Now, Alan, a little of the history of Here's Tom. David had me come in as a sort of guest host for a little while. Everyone really missed him, but they tolerated me. They were so kind. But he always has, I'm going to bring him back in to ask, everyone's wanted to hear you ask this question that I couldn't pull off in the same beautiful way that you did. So, Alan, I turn you over to David for the last skill testing question of the day.
Thank you very much, Joe. And thank you so much, Alan. Final question, and just before I do, don't forget that we are moving to Monday. So from the 20th, we're having a week off, and then we're back on Monday the 28th at 8 p.m. UK. That's noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 7 a.m. in Australia, 9 a.m. in New Zealand, and 6 a.m. in Queensland. How's that for time zone dysphoria? Right.
Oh my
so,
God.
Alan, yeah. That's from Zoom. You know,
I just lost my emotional sobriety. I couldn't follow.
Mate, okay, final question. So, book sales, I think they already have, but book sales have gone through the roof. In fact, Alan Berger is now in the top 100 big earners on Amazon and the like, and I've put your link in chat there for everyone if you want to go and have a look at some of his books there. They're all there. And sales have gone through the roof, and in fact, you don't have to work anymore. You've given up on all this emotional sobriety malarkey, and you're going to spend your money. And well earned, may I say. Well earned. So you decide that you're going to buy a mega yacht. You're going to buy one of those big mega yachts, and you're going to get all your favorite gear. You're going to get the family, the grandkids, whatever. It's going to go onto this massive yacht, and you set sail off the coast, and you set sail from Los Angeles there and head out into the deep ocean and then into the South Pacific. But unfortunately, somewhere off the coast of Fiji, you strike a submerged reef, and the boat, your mighty boat, starts to sink, rapidly sink, goes down the waves, and all you've got time is to chuck your friends and your family overboard. They swim to a nearby deserted island, and all you've got time for is to rush downstairs with a plastic bag, go to your bookshelf and find your favorite book, chuck it in the plastic bag, dive overboard, swim to safety through the sharks, swim to safety, wash up on the desert island, and then await rescue with this favorite book. What's the book, and who's it by?
Well, I would take the 12 Steps of the 12 Traditions. I think that book to me is all about emotional sobriety, and every time I read it, I get more and more out of it and builds wisdom in it. And so that's the book I'd grab. Take it on the island and, start a 12-step 12-step study meeting as we wait for the rescue.
What about if you took two books?
Two books. I think
Don't say the big book.
Okay. Yeah. So if I took a book outside of our literature, let's say, what would I take? There's so many books that have come across, in my life. One book that meant a lot to me. Well, obviously, I love my new book. I think it's a great synthesis of all that I've learned. But one book that I read in graduate school that had a lot to do with my understanding of this was a book by Dr. Karen Horney. I wouldn't recommend it to the lay public. It's quite, it's written at a very high professional level, but it's called Neurosis and Human Growth. Neurosis and Human Growth by Dr. Karen Horney. She was brilliant. I believe she had more of an impact on Bill Wilson than historians have ever just been able to unravel or discover, because she had an institute in New York that was, and I'm sure a lot of people that were going to AA meetings were in treatment with her. She uses the same phrases, claims, demands that Bill uses when he describes about these expectations we have, and these unconscious processes, and us being phony. I mean, if you read her stuff, I see Bill's writing very, very much steeped in her wisdom. So Neurosis and Human Growth.
Fantastic. Wow. And how do you spell her name again? Sorry, quickly.
Horney is her last name, and Karen Horney. She was a neo-Freudian. She departed from Freud. She looked at the power of relationships rather than of sexuality as the driving force in our life. So she was the first really relationally oriented. Yeah, somebody's got her name correct.
Great. Thanks, Jay. Great. Okay, Joe, over to you, mate. Do you want to finish us off?
Yeah, again, I encourage everybody who's a regular to be with us on the 28th. We're going to be talking about some of our upcoming guests, a little bit about the slight change in direction. It'll still have the same all-inclusive, tolerant and, mind-expanding attempt at looking at recovery life as Here's Tom with the Weather has always had. The Monday will be at the old Tom time, which David has posted. And it'll be like a town hall meeting. We're going to talk a little bit about what our thoughts are for the future. And we'd love to hear from you. And you'll get a sort of preview of Here's Tom's to come.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Alan. I'm going to stop recording. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And we'll see you on Monday, the 28th. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.